guess we are live. So can someone just type in the chat when you can begin to hear me and to make sure that the audio levels are good? All right, I guess we are live. So can someone just type in the chat when you can begin to hear? No one's responding, so does that mean we're good? I can't hear you guys, so you guys can only just type. So, but I'm glad it's working. So hopefully we've got a fairly good turnout, about 20 people watching right now, which is pretty good. So right, this is a live stream for our World History 2. Actually, let me change the name of this real fast while I'm seeing it. Change the name real fast, guys. Sorry, bear with me. Alright, that should be changing, hopefully. So, let's kind of get rolling here. Does anyone have any questions? That's kind of, again, the point of these live streams. But if you guys are kind of stingy on the questions on the first time here, then what we can do is we can kind of just run through some of the material real fast that I think you guys should be aware of. So if you have questions, now is the time to start typing them in, guys. So just kind of for reminders, right, the odd day classes are taking this quiz tomorrow, and the even classes for the 8th period, if any one of you are in here, but also 2nd period, with me and Mrs. Kipperman, they're taking it on Monday, the 17th. So, do the questions have to be related to the unit? Yes, essentially. This quiz anyway is directly this quiz is directly related to the Renaissance and the Reformation, and there's a few questions related to the map basically of the world, right? So just beware of that too. One of the maps that you're going to be looking at is kind of part of Europe, and you're going to be asked to effectively kind of place some things on the map, answer some questions about what the map is showing you anyway. So praise of folly, let's kind of get there. Let me bring some things up. So I'm going to close this up here, and then we have right here. So let's open up these notes right here. So, since we're gonna ask this question directly, basically the praise of folly, right, is Erasmus, and it's gonna be related around his Christian humanism, right? Let me full screen that a little bit better. Can I zoom in a little bit? All right. So the praise of folly, right? It is again Erasmus. It's mostly built around this Christian humanism, and the praise of folly. You're not going to be asked about the praise of folly, to be honest. But it is Erasmus' book, and it is a critique on Christianity in particular. If you remember, him, like many of the other Reformation leaders, are going to be kind of about this Catholic Church returning to the simpler, purer days of Christianity and kind of basing it around the Bible in particular, right? He feels that the ceremonies and the relics and all of that stuff of Christianity are ultimately not worthwhile in his mind, right? And that only the Bible is going to kind of get you where you need to go as far as salvation. That's going to be a big thing for Martin Luther as well, and some of the other the other Reformation thinkers that we kind of talked about, right? You have John Huss, you have John Wycliffe, Martin Luther, John Calvin. We can talk more about them in a minute or two as well. Dakota asked, will Great Britain be included, right? And yes, Britain is going to be included in the sense that we talked about Henry VIII, we talked about Queen Elizabeth, right, and all of Henry VIII's wives. You should probably know a little bit about Queen Elizabeth for sure, and her role defending against the Spanish Armada and things like that. So, since there are really no more questions right now, let's just kind of run through some of this from the top, right? So, Renaissance in particular means rebirth, right? This birth of the modern world, essentially, and I would for sure know that going into the quiz, because there might be a question that asks something similar, right? And it's going to be this rebirth of art, architecture, music, literature, intellectual ideas, and things like that that are going to be kind of looked at from the area in Italy, right, where the Renaissance begins, and I would definitely know that as well. Hint, hint, wink, wink. But Italy is going to have this big advantage over parts of Europe, right? It's going to be very centrally located. It has these big, wealthy cities from being on the Mediterranean. It's going to gain these wealthy merchants. And also the fact that the Greeks and the Romans were essentially just around them, right? So the fact that they had these leftover artifacts and architecture and things from these earlier times is going to make these people curious, right? And that's why the Renaissance is going to start in Italy and spread out from Italy, right, into northern other parts of Europe, into Europe from there, right? So I would also know that for your quiz. So some big thinkers and big accomplishments are going to kind of come around literature and architecture and painting and artistry and things like that, right? So we talked about Shakespeare, who is a writer, right? He writes a number of plays and sonnets and things like that. That's probably all you would need to know there if you're going to be asked about him. We talked about humanism, which is an idea that you should definitely know, right? This idea of improving yourself through the studies, right? So that's definitely something. And if humanism is just improving yourself through your studies of history and philosophy and poetry, rhetoric, grammar, things like that, then Christian humanism is improving yourself through the fundamental teachings of Christianity, right? And that kind of gets us back full circle here to Dakota's question, or it was Dakota, sorry, someone's question anyway, on the praise of folly. So he is the first kind of Christian humanist, the largest one we're talking about anyway, for sure. I realize I'm kind of blocking you guys. I'm going to kind of make myself a little smaller on your screen. Whoops, I don't want to do that. A little bit smaller. There we go. Whoops. Oh, I lost my spot here. Right, so we also talked about Machiavelli, and you should probably know of the Prince, and the ideas that are included by the Prince, right? The issue of how to get political power, the whole idea of the ends justify the means, and the leaders kind of doing whatever things that it needs to do to keep its leader, its people and kingdom going and safe, kind of no matter what that is, right? So definitely know of Machiavelli for sure. We talked about Michelangelo, right? And Michelangelo is a painter and a sculptor and an architect, and you could argue that he is essentially a Renaissance man, is the kind of words we were describing as, right? Someone who is effectively good at a lot of different things, right? So things you should probably know that he created, right? You should definitely know the Sistine Chapel. You should know about the David, his contributions to St. Peter's Basilica. So moving on, we have Da Vinci, who probably defines the Renaissance man even more than Michelangelo. He's a scientist, an inventor, an artist, right? You should definitely know that he painted the Mona Lisa, right? That would be kind of the big thing to kind of take from that for sure. We watched that, what I think is a cool video anyway. I'm not going to put that on again. That doesn't make any sense. But it is there for you if you would like in our Google Classroom. Remember, right? Basically, we have all of the different days through here. Let's take a look at the map real fast, because that's something that you should definitely know as well. So we talked about religions, right? There's some overlap of Christianity and Judaism at the time of 1500. And you can see that right there. Right, Judaism is here. Oops, I made, I guess, a bad line or something when I was doing that. Christianity is going to be highlighted kind of right there, right? And through Europe and kind of into the Near East, if you will. Islam in northern Africa and also into the Middle East, right? Hinduism is going to be more kind of out east by India over there, and Buddhism is going to kind of take up shop in China and Southeast Asia for the most part. Okay, that's your religions. You should definitely know your territorial kingdoms too. So hopefully you all are familiar with the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incas. Right there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Know that they are in the Western Hemisphere, right? So anyway, We have Spain right here. We've got France. We've got England, right? The Kingdom of England. You've got the Ottoman Empire. You have the Songhai, which I would for sure kind of take a look at and make sure you know where it is. You have the Mughal Empire. Over here in India, you've got China around 1420 anyway. You have Ming China at the time. And then ultimately the Tsardom of Russia as well. So you should be aware these places are. There is at least one or two of these on. So I guess you're not going to know which one in particular, but ultimately it is for sure. Some of this is on there anyway. So let's kind of skip back to where we just were. So we talked about the Renaissance. We just kind of ran through all of that real fast. So let's kind of go into the causes of the Reformation again. Whoops, you know what? Yeah, this will work. Why not? Okay. So we talked about how the religion spread, right? You watched that video with Mrs. Kipperman. You learned that early Christianity, I kind of showed you on the map, was located mostly in Europe and partly in the Middle East, right? It came out of the Middle East, right? Jesus came out of what is Jerusalem and the modern Middle East anyway. The Holy Book is the Bible, right, which includes the Old Testament and the New Testament, whereas Judaism only kind of really buys into the Old Testament, right? And yes, the test is multiple choice. It's 35 questions, if you didn't hear me say it the first time. It's 35 questions. There's about 5 or 6 questions that are going to be kind of based around a map, really 2 maps. One's going to be, hey, what is this going on? And the other one's going to be kind of locating kingdoms on the map. So, anyway, we talked about the Roman Catholic Church being the main religious entity in Europe, right? It was an extremely powerful entity, grew in size, power, and wealth through this time period. So I'm just going to fly through this because we've kind of done this already, right? And all Christians were subject to the authority of the Pope at this time. So Megan asked me to define Protestantism. So Protestantism in particular is basically the break in Christianity that is led through and by Martin Luther, right? So Martin Luther is going to end up with Lutheranism, right? You're going to have John Calvin being another branch of Protestantism. You're going to also have the Anglican Church, which is going to be the Church of England. That's going to come from Henry VIII, which we will kind of get to again here in a second, right? So hopefully that answers your question there, Megan. And I'll keep going here, right? So the merchants in Northern Europe didn't like paying to Rome, right? Most of the popes and things like that are going to come out of Italy, and ultimately so it's this. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. So the Reformation is going to come from the church, right? Religious reform in the church, that's going to be the main idea, right? And it's going to go against the Pope. It's going to go against Catholicism, right? So it's going to be kind of led out of northern Germany in particular. But some things you should definitely know about kind of prior to the Protestant Reformation, right, is this idea of usury, right? And usury is lending of money, right? So you should definitely be aware of this, right? And with the Italians dominating the church, they didn't like the idea of these wealthy merchants lending this money to people. They didn't think it was Christian-like, if you will. And ultimately, they're going to kind of crack down on this. So you should definitely know what usury means for sure. But anyway, we also talked about indulgences in class. Martin Luther is going to be the big person who goes against indulgences as well. He's going to speak out of that with his 95 Theses, right, that he pins onto the wall of the Wittenberg Church in what is now modern-day Germany, right? So who are the people that kind of lead the way in the Protestant Reformation? We already talked about Erasmus a little bit, right? And how he's going to kind of write about Christian humanism and such. but also Martin Luther, right, is going to kind of do as we said, pin the 95 Thesis. John Calvin is going to believe in some other things, which we'll talk about momentarily. And then King Henry VIII, right? So Martin Luther, these are important, guys, so you should really kind of pay attention here for sure. But he's going to believe that the Bible is the ultimate authority for Christianity, right? And that ultimately your salvation is going to be dependent on faith alone, right? And those things are important, and there very well could be questions on there about that. He pins the 95 Thesis, I've already kind of said. So let's kind of keep rolling here. We have John Calvin, whose big thing is probably predestination. But you should also know about living a righteous life and a good work ethic. And again, I'm going to tell you that there's going to be a question that's going to be almost more or less exactly using those words. So that'd be a good idea. So next, let's go to King Henry VIII, right? And Henry VIII is the man who divorces all of his wives and beheads a number of them and kills a number of them, right? And when his first wife, who is unable... Yes, Lutheranism is a branch of Protestantism. That is correct, Megan. But anyway, so Henry VIII, when he is unable to have a son from his first wife, he ends up divorcing her, right? And wanting to divorce her anyway. And he asks for an annulment on the marriage from the church, from the Pope, who it does not grant it to him. So he gets kind of frustrated, and he divorces her anyway, right? So doing so, he kind of breaks away from the church in his own way, right? And he heads the Church of England himself, right? The Anglican Church. And another thing that he also did was kind of reappropriate the lands of the Catholic Church in England to some of his loyal religious people. So it kind of takes the land away from the church, who is going to be a little annoyed. I do not have a Quizlet set up, I'm sorry. So that's Henry VIII, right? We saw this. So divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived, right? Are the way to remember these. We're not going to ask you to remember the wives here, but that's just kind of the story, right? So, you have Mary, born... I'm pointing to the screen like you guys can see what I'm doing. I can use my mouse, though. So you have Mary, right? Oops, of course I have my pointer. Can I do the pointer? Oh, it's going to do that every time. So you have Mary, born of Catherine, anyway. And ultimately you have Elizabeth, born of Anne, right here. And Mary is going to end up dying, right? While she's on the throne after Henry VIII. Sorry, it's been a long day. But anyway, so she's going to die, right? And it's going to pave the way for Elizabeth, but not before she tries to reconvert England back to Catholicism after Henry VIII had tried, right? So when Mary dies, you're going to ultimately have Anne's daughter, now Elizabeth, take control. And when Elizabeth takes control, she's going to be in charge for a really long time, but she's also a Protestant, so she kind of turns it back and flips it back over from Mary, right? So she becomes the head of the Church of England, but she's going to be a bit more tolerant than Mary, who becomes known as Bloody Mary because of how harshly she cracked down, right? Elizabeth's going to begin to kind of expand English interests and colonialism in the New World. But you're also going to have this kind of major defeat against the Spanish, who is frustrated because Mary was actually the wife of the King of Spain. So the King of Spain actually felt that he had some sort of claim to the English throne. So anyway, the Spanish Armada is big. We already talked about Erasmus as well in the last notes, so we'll leave that. I don't know if we completely need to go through the other set too, just simply because we did that fairly recently, but I can kind of point a couple things out for sure. Give me 1 second. Right, two people you should definitely know. Is John Wycliffe and Jan Hus, right? So Jan Hus is he's going to be declared a heretic, right? Someone who's going against the church. and ultimately the Pope and such are going to burn him at the stake for being a heretic, right? Kind of stinks. You have John Wycliffe, who is going to translate the Bible in English, and that's going to be important because people are now going to be able to read the Bible, right? So we talked about Reformation having its root in religion and theology and the study of God, and the differences that are going to pop up from the Reformation, right? Religious hatred, it's going to lead to war, destruction, and political changes and things like that, right? So we talked about the Holy Roman Emperor, mostly being from the Habsburg family, the dynasty, if you will. You have Germany kind of being not Germany. It wasn't unified in the slightest. Tons of kingdoms and principalities and things like that, right? So anyway, moving on, right? The northern princes, if you go back to the map, right? The northern part, my little pop-up of the northern part anyway, is going to end up mostly Protestant. So, it's going to be mostly Protestant, and they're going to break away much sooner. They're a little farther away from Italy, right? They're a little farther away from the Papal States, and that's going to be pretty important because they are going to feel that they have political gain here. They can go against the Habsburgs, right? So that's pretty important to know, right? So I just kind of said all that. Ultimately, you're going to get this religious war between the Catholics and the Protestants, the 30 Years' War, right, between 1618 and 1648. It's going to be a very devastating war in Europe, right, and it's going to ruin Germany's economy. You're going to have almost half, in parts of Germany, almost half of people are going to effectively be killed because of how brutal this war is. And you're going to have this man, Cardinal Richelieu, who is going to kind of turn this into a political war more than so than a religious in France. So we talked about him. Right here's just the map, quick, of the percentages of people lost in these areas in these kingdoms in Germany. So we talked about the Huguenots, right, and how some of these Calvinists were trying to flee from Germany and they head to France. He's going to flee to France, right, and ultimately the Catholic monarch at the time, a man named Henry IV, is going to allow them essentially to come in, right? They're kind of wartime refugees, and he appreciates that. And the religious kind of war in France is essentially going to end for the time being. But about 100 years later, you're going to have Louis XIV, and Louis XIV is going to kind of revoke this. So you should definitely know the Edict of Nantes. For sure, that's kind of something that you should be aware of, right? Okay. That's a double part here. So, Megan asked if on the map questions we'll be able to put down where each religion is. And no, actually the map is not necessarily religion oriented like that. It's going to be more reading a map and getting information off of a map for some of the questions. So for at least one of the maps. The other map is kind of, I'd say it's more placing of empires than religion, actually. You should know of the Jesuits, for sure. I would probably know a little bit about the Inquisition being used to kind of crack down and put these people on trial of heretics, right? You also have the Council of Trent, which is going to be put in place. It's all multiple choice, yes. You have the Council of Trent, which is going to be put in place to kind of reaffirm these church doctrines and practices, which we talked about, right? Okay, moving on. Inquisition, we did. The torture and pretty rough stuff going on. We talked about how after this is all said, there are no short answers on this test, no. So we talked about all after this, right? People are going to be a lot more tolerant, religiously tolerant as well. People are going to kind of start individually working on themselves again. You're going to have this growth of secularism, right? In Eastern Europe or Eastern Orthodox, that is correct, Carolyn. So the last big piece of the puzzle before we kind of sign off and I answer any other questions that you may have quickly is effectively the Bible, right? And the printing press, and it's important because the printing press is going to help grow the literacy rates, right? Literacy is going to be stimulated by being able the fact that you can actually read, whereas previously you had to, monks had to handwrite it, right? And that's kind of a big deal. So the fact that now it's being printed and there's being a number of, many more copies is a pretty big deal, and people are going to be able to interpret the Bible the way they see, which is going to lead to the discrepancies and people kind of speaking out against the Catholic Church because they feel that the Catholic Church is doing it wrong, basically. So that's what leads to the Reformation in the first place, and that's where we're at. So that's more or less it, right? It's not that much material. We've only been going for about 20 minutes here, even though I am talking fairly quickly. So if there's any last questions, I'll give you guys another minute or two to kind of ask them, and I can answer them as best I can, and then otherwise I'll leave you guys to your studying. Looks like that's going to be about it. So that's pretty good turnout, actually. We got about 20, I saw 24, 25 at the highest, so that's pretty good. Considering we've only got that's about a third of all the people that we have. That's not bad at all, especially with the football game going on. You do not need no definition of humanism, the exact definition anyway, no. For sure. Reformation, there's no real, we didn't really define it per se. It is just kind of the split of Catholicism and other branches of Christianity, right? I would definitely know about the printing press and know about how it increases literacy, right? That's something that I would probably think about, for sure. Alright, I think we'll call it now then. So, thanks for coming out, guys. Hopefully it helps you guys. Was invented by Johannes Gutenberg. Megan, that is correct. So thanks for coming out, and hopefully you got something out of it. I gave some pretty good, not that subtle hints on what's going to be on the test, so hopefully you do pretty well. So we will see you tomorrow, and good luck with the rest of your studying.